Always choose truth.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to
The peace treaty signed by government leaders and separatist rebels in Mali 3 years ago was meant to usher in a new era of peace and stability in the Northwest African country. But progress in implementing the agreement has been slow and insecurity has grown. The violence that began with the uprising and seizure of territory in the north has now spread into previously stable central Mali. Armed groups have taken advantage of interethnic grievances and local resentment towards the government to spread fear and chaos, forcing thousands to flee. President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, who has ruled since 2013, was re-elected earlier this year for a second term. He announced a government reshuffle aimed at restoring peace, stability and foreign investment, all important to boost the economy and reduce poverty. As part of the reshuffle, Kamissa Camara was named Mali's new Minister of Foreign Affairs. Is the 35-year-old's appointment the beginning of comprehensive institutional reforms? And how can peace be achieved in the foreseeable future? We find out more as Kamissa Camara, Mali's Minister of Foreign Affairs, talks to Al Jazeera. Foreign Minister Kamissa Camara, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of things have gone wrong in Mali since the multi-dimensional crisis that was triggered in 2012. In almost 7 years, Malians have witnessed a coup, an insurgency, intervention by French, UN and African troops, and yet today armed groups are reorganizing, extending violence from the northern to the central regions. Why is it so hard to bring peace and security to your country?
I think it's a very dramatic narrative that you're giving right now. I think Mali has gone through a lot since 2011. We have indeed gone through a military coup, an insurgency, but we also have had a lot of successes. We organized 2 peaceful presidential elections. We have a peace process that is ongoing. We have a DDR that just started. We have a full ministry in charge of the peace process. We have a 6% growth rate. This is the positive outcomes that we've had from this multidimensional crisis that you just described.
It's good to point out the positives because you are right, they are indeed positives. But when you look at the news, we had Malian authorities saying a few days ago that they arrested 4 men with links to ISIL who were planning attacks in several West African capitals. We've always known about the Al-Qaeda threat, but what about this ISIL threat today? How real and how serious is it? And what's being done to prevent the group getting a foothold in this region?
So the terrorist issue is not a Malian issue. We have been experiencing it all over the world. It's really difficult, or I would say even inaccurate, to take out the security issues of Mali out of the issues of the Sahel region. That is why we have, for example, currently a G5 Sahel, which is a military partnership between 5 Sahel countries, namely Mali, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, Chad, and Niger, in order to curtail the terrorism issue in the Sahel region. There is a terrorist issue in the Sahel region and also in the world.
Indeed, not just in Mali, but in Niger as well, in all these countries. And I will get to the G5 in just a second to ask you why it's taking a while to get this force off the ground. But just coming back to the violence in Mali, there has been intercommunal violence recently in Mali.
There has been intercommunal violence.
That's not linked at all to some terrorist elements infiltrating some of these regions which have had grievances.
It's way more complicated than that.
Okay. Perhaps you can explain to our international audience.
So in Mali, what we currently have is a juxtaposition of multiple different security crises that we've had over the years. In the central part of Mali, it's really a difficult situation. It's a complex one that cannot be simply described as a terrorist situation. You have some cultural aspects of it. You have, it's being described as an ethnic conflict, which is in my opinion, not currently the case. You have.
So what is it then?
It's a pastoralist issue that has been exacerbated by terrorist groups, that has been utilized by terrorist groups.
So the armed groups have infiltrated these local communities.
They do have infiltrated those local communities.
That have had grievances.
That have had grievances.
Have their grievances been addressed by the government of the local communities?
So if you let me finish, I can tell you that what we currently have, again, is a pastoralist issue between Fulani herders that are against Bozo herders. It's a complex security situation that has been exacerbated by terrorist groups. So now it is being perceived as an ethnic conflict, which is not necessarily the root of it.
Coming back to my questions, have their grievances been addressed? What has the government done to address the grievances of the local communities in the center and the north, which was at the origin of the crisis in 2012, 2013?
So it's more complex than that. It is how it's been described in the news. But for example, when we're talking about grievances in the northern regions of Mali, you also have to understand that the issues that have been brought up by separatist rebels in northern Mali are the same issues that other groups throughout the country are currently facing. Lack of access to medical services, lack of schools,
yes.
Exactly, to basic services. So what the government is currently doing is making sure that those basic services are reachable for all of the population. And we currently have an institutional reform going on so that those local services and the local population feel closer to those services.
Let's talk about the G5 because you touched on this, and Sahel countries, including Mali, joined forces in 2017 to establish this multinational force, security force, with the aim of defeating armed groups in the region, the primary aim. More than a year after it was set up, this force has yet to fully become operational, from what I understand. Why is it proving difficult to get it off the ground? Is it just down to a lack of resources and funding, as we're hearing, or are there other factors involved?
Oh, there are other factors. Okay. There's definitely a lack of funding for the joint force to be fully operational. We currently have a need of over 400 million euro per year. Now it's our job to make sure that the international community understands that this joint force is the only sustainable solution we currently have in order to curtail the fragile security situation that we have in the Sahel region. So once we are able to do that, then the international community will understand the need for us to have this joint force operational. Another aspect, another difficulty of it is that this regional force is basically a cooperation between military forces of 5 countries. Some of them are perceived as weak, such as the one we currently have in Mali, but we are rebuilding. We have been rebuilding since 2013, and we also have to explain better that military forces that have more capacity, such as the Chadian one, in the scheme of a G5 Sahel region, can really pull up all of the other military forces and build their capacity.
What would you say to people who say that this G5 experiment can't really work in a region that is crowded by sometimes competing military and domestic initiatives?
I would tell them that what we are doing right now is what the international community needs. This is what they're asking us to do, which is take ownership of our own security situation. So we are not in a negative atmosphere here. We are trying to find solutions to our own problems, and this is what the international community has been pushing African countries to do.
You were at the G5 donor conference in Mauritania earlier this year, but President Keita wasn't in attendance, despite Mali being perhaps one of the most important countries in this G5 from a security point of view. Why did he not attend?
But President Keita is president of Mali. He has a lot of competing meetings that he has to attend. If he could not attend this one, he could not.
You mentioned, the fact that some countries had militaries that were perceived perhaps as weaker than the others. Are you happy with the current structure of the G5? There have been reports that Mali wants perhaps a bigger position, a bigger role within this G5, and that there's been some discontent about Mauritania taking a leading role. Can you deny or confirm these reports?
I can tell you that rumors are rumors. What I can tell you is that what we are trying to do is for 5 Sahel countries that are facing the same security issues to work together in order to curtail a growing terrorist
So these are just
threat.
rumors about the tensions with Mauritania?
These are totally irrelevant to the operationalization of the joint force of the G5 Sahel.
It's not just, of course, the armed groups, as you've said. It's also drugs trafficking, human trafficking in this region. And the G5's mandate, I understand, is to fight all of this. It's a very tall order.
It is.
It is, isn't it?
It is.
So how do you actually prioritize with all these things that you have to fight, with the different agendas also of your allies and European partners who are perhaps more interested in curbing illegal immigration? How do you prioritize which of these to focus on?
The good thing with the G5 Sahel, again, is that we have 5 Sahel countries that all agree on why they came together. We have an African Union, which is a continental organization that does support our efforts in the Sahel region. And we need the lead of the African Union in order to show our European partners that we know what we're doing and we know why we're doing it.
But as far as you're concerned, what is the most urgent task right now for this body?
All of these need to be addressed simultaneously. You cannot just take one separately from the others. They have to be taken into account simultaneously. When we're talking about G5 Sahel, there is also a development branch of the G5 Sahel called Alliance Sahel, meaning that you cannot take away the security aspect of it without addressing the development needs of the region. So we're doing both at the same time. Again, it's a complex situation. It's a multidimensional situation, so all of those issues need to be addressed at the same time.
Okay, let's move on to the issue of human rights, if we can, Foreign Minister. One of our teams was recently at the Mali-Mauritania border, and they encountered a number of Malians, specifically from Timbuktu, who'd crossed into Mauritania. There are currently some 57,000 refugees at the Mbara refugee camp in Mauritania, and most of them say they come from Mali. Can you tell us, can you shed light as to what's happening right now in the region and why we're seeing this exodus?
So, exodus is a big word. What we're seeing in the region and what we've been seeing over the past 5 years are people crossing one border to the other to seek refuge when there is a security crisis in a certain region. What Mali is currently doing is making sure that those refugees who are Malians and can prove that they're Malians are able to come back to their homes. This is what we're doing.
Do you think some of them are not Malians?
What I can say is that in the region, there are porous borders. It's easy to pretend that you're from one country when you're from another. So all of those 5 countries need to work together to make sure that the refugees that are identified as nationals are able to come back to their homes.
Are the conditions right for them to come back to their homes?
It depends on the areas. The Sahel region is
No, I'm talking about
big
Mali specifically now. I'm not
talking about Mali.
G5,
Mali
yes.
is a big region, so you cannot talk about
Okay,
Timbuktu.
if they've come from northern Mali, is it safe for them to
Northern
return?
Mali is not a city, it's a
I know
region.
it's a region. I know, understand that.
Thank you.
Okay, so if they've come from that region in certain cities, is it safe for them to return?
It's really hard to say that refugees can come back to Timbuktu and they also can come back to Kidal. You cannot just generalize throughout the northern region of Mali. So in certain regions, when it's safe for them to come back, the government puts in place a process so that they do come back to their homes.
The reason I asked about people going into Mauritania is because our team, when they spoke to some of the people there, some of the Malians who had left, they said to us that Malian soldiers had gone through their villages, pillaging and harassing them. Are you aware of this? Are Malian soldiers targeting people that they're supposed to be protecting?
I have never heard of such a thing.
Never?
Never.
If there are reports, is the Malian government willing to investigate?
We are definitely always willing to investigate. Even when there are human rights abuses, we always investigate. This is a process that we have in place.
Is there oversight? Is there oversight? Because human rights violations, according to Alioune Tine, the UN expert on human rights, he said this in October, that the Malian state, and these are not reports or rumors, this is a UN expert on human rights, said, I quote, "The Malian state has not fulfilled its sovereign role in protecting property and people and bringing perpetrators of criminal acts to justice." What do you respond to that?
I respond to that by saying that human rights violations are alleged violations until they are proven right. And the Malian government does take this issue very seriously. We do have teams on the ground who do investigate. We also work with local civil society organizations to make sure that the accusations that we are hearing about are accurate. Again, we take this issue very seriously, and measures are being taken when we find out that those alleged violations are true.
So when the UN expert on human rights made this report, announced this in October, just 2 months ago, what specific measures did the government enact to look into this? Can you give us a concrete example, perhaps?
The concrete example is that those reports do go to the Ministry of Defense, which does take it up to whoever needs to read those reports, and then they do make investigations. So since I work in the Foreign Ministry, I do work with everyone, but I cannot speak for the Ministry of Defense.
There is some good news, as you've said. GDP growth is stable at around 5%. There's been a rise in agricultural productivity as well. Despite the security challenges, the IMF and World Bank continue to support Mali financially. What does that say about how the country is governed, in your view? What would you like to say as far as that to the world?
It does say that Mali is a very resilient country, that what we've gone through since 2011 could not foresee that we would have such a strong economic growth. It does show that despite all of those challenges, we're able to stay afloat. It shows that despite the security challenges that we currently have, we're a country that is ready for investments, and that we are ready to take charge of all of the issues that we currently have, and we're finding solutions to them.
But both public and private investment continues to focus on the South, does it not?
It does, and that's a problem because we have a big country, and what we do not want to have is continued grievances in the center and the north. And I'm ready to concede that those regions do have grievances towards the state.
So what's the government doing concretely to address those grievances? If you could give us specific examples again of what's being done to harness the development of the northern region and the central regions.
So what you have to understand is that we have a big country, that we're dealing with the peace process, that we're dealing with the economy, that we're showing the international community that we have a G5 Sahel that's in place, that that is important to us, that we're tackling a lot of issues at the same time. You just talked about human rights violations. You cannot do all of that and then say that you're developing the center and the north. So with this strong economic growth,
presumably something has happened in the last 7 years.
Of course something has happened. That's why we have an economic growth of 6%. So what we're doing is that we are touring the world. This is what I'm doing to show the international community and to tell them that we're ready for investment.
I just want to come back to the idea of basic services for the northern regions. When you hear reports that airports are being built and that a train service, that trains are going to be built there, that's all great news, I have to say. It's very positive. But what about providing basic services, clean water, electricity to these regions?
This is an issue in the south, in the center, and in the north. It's the issue of any developing country, and Mali is a developing country. And we are working towards that. And I would love to tell you in 5 years that we don't have any of those issues anymore. This is what we're working towards.
Okay. The 2015 peace accord signed between the government and the rebels in the north proposed the introduction of new regional representatives and local authorities, right? But the peace accord seems to be stagnating. What are the, as far as the government is concerned anyway, what are the sticking points? Why can't we move this forward?
So I'm actually surprised that you would say that the peace process is stagnating.
Well, hasn't it? I mean, institutional reforms have been difficult to implement and contentious, haven't they not?
Okay, so this is your report. So what I tell you from Mali, from the ground, is that since 2015, we have made tremendous progress on the peace agreement. For once, I can tell you that in those meetings that we have with the former armed groups, the ones who signed the peace agreement, we all speak with one voice. The DDR process, which is the central process of the peace agreement, just started a few weeks ago. This is the central part of it. Once this is completed, then we can say that
When do you expect that to be completed?
So I don't know if you realize, but a DDR process usually takes 8 to 10 years to complete. We are being encouraged to complete one within 1 year. This is what we're doing with the international community. This is what we're doing with the UN mission that we have in Mali, which has been supporting us. This is what we think we can complete within 1 year. So it's a feat that the Malian government will be able to do. In September, we created an entire ministry in charge of the peace process. This is great progress on the front of the peace agreement. You also have to remember that this is not the first peace agreement that we've signed. This is probably the third or the fourth. So we are on a time crunch, but we also want to make sure that this is the last one that we signed, and that all of the aspects of this peace process are implemented in a way that they're sustainable and that we don't have to come back to it a few years later.
Okay. There were elections recently in Mali. President Keita re-elected. During his first term, there were accusations of corruption and nepotism. What can Malians expect from this second term? What is the government going to do to regain the trust of the people when it comes to the issue of corruption and nepotism?
So, excellent question. On the issue of corruption, we've created a ministry to take care of the corruption issue. What we have to do is we have to communicate more. We have to communicate more on how the government works. We have to communicate more as to what the government wants for the country. We have to include civil society more in all of our discussions, in our dialogue session. We're doing way more than we used to do back then, and this is what we believe will probably bring the population closer to the ones who govern them.
I just want to open it up a little bit and talk about relations with the United States, first of all, relations with the current U.S. administration. Focus and interest in Africa seems to have diminished somewhat under the Trump administration. How do you see relations evolving, not just with Mali, but with the continent as a whole, as far as the United States is concerned? Are you optimistic that something good can come out of it?
What can come out of it is that the African continent will open up to many different partners.
China?
Very well possible. This has been the case. Kenya has had an excellent relationship with China. Our neighbor Senegal has had an excellent relationship with China. I wouldn't say only...
It's a relationship that has no strings attached, so convenient for African countries.
Convenient, yes, but also that allows us to reach the goals that we have set for ourselves. We still consider the United States as a very strategic partner. I lived in Washington, D.C. for 11 years. I've worked with the U.S. administration. I know how this administration
How
works.
is working with the current administration?
Working with the current administration is definitely different from that of the former one. That's what happened when an administration changes, but we also have to adapt. This is also part of governing a country. You have to open up partnerships. You cannot just focus your partnership with only one country or one continent. So we have to diversify.
What about relations with the European Union and France, former colonial power, of course? They seem to be very much concerned right now, as far as Europe is concerned anyway, with fighting illegal immigration. They signed a migration deal with Niger and Mali. What do you say to those who will say that Europe's policies are turning migrants into a resource to be exploited? On the issue of migration.
The issue of migration is a very sensitive one. It's a sensitive one for those countries like Mali. I am myself the daughter of migrant parents. I have myself migrated to the United States to come back to my country of origin. So this issue is sensitive because migrants, for example, Malian migrants, bring a lot of money back home. They do open up schools, they do open up clinics. In terms of the European Union or the European countries welcoming migrants, we understand that there is it's a heavy lift for European countries to welcome that many migrants.
Sending them back is also an issue,
it can be.
Not? Yes.
So what our position is that we do fight irregular migration. We do encourage migration, and we would like for our citizens to be able to migrate whenever they want to, but we want this to be done in a way that their human rights are protected, that they do go to these countries and be respected as they ought to be. So this is what we are trying to do.
All right, one last question, if I may.
Please.
A more personal one, perhaps. You are the youngest foreign minister in Mali. You were appointed not long ago. What do you hope to bring to the position? What do you think you can bring to your country? What do you hope to achieve?
What keeps me up at night is to make sure that the interests of Mali are protected whenever I travel the world, to make sure that I represent my country well, that I do make sure that the international community understands that the issues of Mali are not necessarily focused on the security aspect of it, that we have potential, that we have things to offer.
Kamissa Camara, Foreign Minister of Mali, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.